Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, we're going to talk about my personal favorite lens for the Fuji GFX system, the GF45mm 2.8. I'm pleased to announce that my 3 Capture One style packs, Metamorphic Portraits, The Sound of Silver, and Rangefinder are all now available for purchase on my website. Check out a link in the description of this video. And now, on to today's episode. $45mm. On a 33 by 44mm medium format sensor, it's that perfect spot between normal and wide angle. Slightly wider than a normal field of view. Close enough for your subject to command the frame, but wide enough to define your environment, but not so wide that you have distortion. It's the equivalent perspective to 35mm in full frame, but with all the depth of field benefits of medium format. It's a focal length that allows you to be creative. It's a focal length that allows you to tell stories. And in today's episode, I'm going to tell you why the GF45mm 2.8 is my favorite lens for the Fuji GFX mount. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. So as I said in the intro of this episode, the GF45 2.8 is my favorite lens for the entire GFX system. Now, I know some of you are watching this and you're like, well, the 55 1.7 is amazing, and the 110 f2 is amazing, and the 80 1.7 is amazing. And yeah, you're right, they are all amazing. However, there's more to photography than just shallow depth of field, liquidy backgrounds, and bokeh. I personally like to tell stories. I like to have that slightly wider than normal field of view. I want to talk about who was there, what was going on, what they were doing, the storytelling focal length. 45mm on the Fuji GFX system. In the full frame world, that would be about 35mm. So let's talk about why I love the GF45mm 2.8 so much, but first let's talk about the specs. The GF45mm f2.8R WR lens is a weather-sealed lens for the Fuji GF mount going on GFX cameras. Its optical design is 11 elements in 8 groups and includes one aspherical 2 ED element. It has 9 rounded aperture blades, It's the equivalent of 36 millimeters on full frame. It has an angle of view of 62.6 degrees. It has an aperture ring in third stop increments. It has a maximum aperture of 2.8 and a minimum aperture of f32. It has a minimum focusing distance of 17.7 inches or 45 centimeters. Its maximum magnification is 0.14. Its filter thread size is 62 millimeters. The dimensions are a small 3.31 by 3.46 inches or 84 by 88 millimeters. Its weight is 17.28 ounces or 490 grams, and it comes in at a street price of $1,699 US. So let's talk about the pros of this lens. The pros of this lens to me is that the image quality is amazing. As I've said, it's my favorite lens for storytelling. It's been with me every step of the way with the Fuji GFX. I love the 63mm. I love my 110mm. I love my 50. I've used the 23mm, the 30. I think it's a 30mm or 32mm. I can't remember off the top of my head. I've used the 32 to 64. I've used the 35 to 70. I've used the 81.7 and very briefly used the 55 1.7. And the 45, I just keep coming back to it. As a matter of fact, the reason why I haven't purchased the 55 1.7 is because I like the 45 2.8 so much, and it's so close in focal length. And I also own a 50 3.5. I just really don't see the use of spending, you know, $2,000-$3,000 on another lens because I don't really care about having all that bokeh. Another pro for a 45mm focal length, I think the bokeh on it is very beautiful. I love the little bokeh balls it gives me. They are smooth balls. I'm not going to put that joke in there, or maybe I will. And of course, that 45mm focal length is great for editorials. It's great for street photography and all the genres that I personally gravitate toward, which is another pro of this lens for me. Like practically all Fuji GFX lenses, it is razor sharp, surgically sharp. You will cut yourself on the finger sharp. All the pictures that I've taken with this lens have been razor sharp. The only time something doesn't look really good is when it misses focus. More on that later. In 2022, I was able to take this lens on a vacation to the American Southwest. I saw Monument Valley, I saw the Grand Canyon, we went to White Sands, and I found that in most cases, 45mm was wide enough. Outside of Horseshoe Bend, which you can see right here where it clearly wasn't wide enough, I found that like 90-95% of the shots that I wanted to take, 45mm got the job done, and it wasn't big and it wasn't bulky, and for me, that makes this lens the perfect companion for travel and landscapes. But it doesn't just stop there. I think the 45 2.8 is also fantastic for street photography, a general walk-around lens. I know Fuji markets the 50 3.5 as their quote-unquote street photography lens, but the 45 is just a little bit bigger, just a little bit heavier. However, it's a little bit brighter and a little bit wider, and so for what I do, even if I'm not close enough, I have a 100 megapixel camera, I can simply crop it. But in general, I find 45 is exactly where I want to be for street and general walk-around photography. One of the reasons I love it so much is it doesn't take up a lot of space, unlike the gargantuan 110 f2 and some of the larger lenses. It's one of those lenses that does make the GFX system feel a little bit more like you're shooting on a full frame. This lens goes with me on every single shoot without failure because it takes up such little space in my bag. Outside of the 63 2.8, I think this is my second smallest regular use lens. I do have the 50 3.5, but I don't really use that one as much as the 63 or the 45 or the 110. Now, some of you might be wondering about the 2.8 maximum aperture. Is that going to be enough for you? Well, it's been enough for me. Of course, keep in mind, with a medium format camera, they collect more light at the sensor. They do better at higher ISOs. So I can shoot this guy at 12,800, and it looks like a lot of cameras shooting at like 1,600 or maybe even 3,200. So you can get away with quite a bit with these cameras. Having a 2.8 maximum aperture in terms of light collection and light transmission, I find has not been a big deal. And that's one of the reasons why I haven't purchased the kind of close to similar focal length, the 55 1.7, which of course is a big lens among Fuji GFX enthusiasts. They love it. I personally used it at the WPPI show in Las Vegas back in March, and I thought it was a good lens, but the size of it was noticeably larger. And since I've been perfectly happy with the 2.8, I intend to just keep this 45 2.8, and I'm going to pass on the 55 1.7. It does have the aperture ring, which some of you may or may not like. I personally don't care about the aperture ring. I'm totally fine putting it in the C mode, where when you push this switch down, you can put it in the C mode and operate this camera just like a typical DSLR, like a Canon or a Nikon, where you just use the dials. I'm perfectly happy doing that, because when I do engage the aperture ring, I often find myself at like f22, and that was not my intention. I am just a klutz. So I can take or leave the aperture ring. But for those of you who do love the aperture ring, this does have the aperture ring. You can, of course, put it in the automatic mode as well, in addition to using it with that stepped aperture ring, and it moves in 1/3 stop increments. So while it's a pro for a lot of you, I'm going to go ahead and put the aperture ring as kind of in the middle, or slightly lean it toward being a con for me. I couldn't care less about aperture rings. If they sold these lenses for $100 or $200 less and took the aperture ring out altogether, I'd totally be in favor of that. And I do know that I'm in the minority, because a lot of you Fuji users love the aperture ring. So I'll put that as a pro for you, but not necessarily for me. I find that the focus ring on this is very smooth, and so I'm definitely going to put that under the pros. If you are a manual focusing type, this is perfect for manual focus. Unlike my GFX body, which just gets wear and tear from normal use, I mean, even like this ring right here where I push the shutter release has worn down from my fingers, which I do baby my camera, so I don't like Fuji GFX bodies. Have been very outspoken that they need to improve the quality of their bodies, but unlike their bodies, I've had nothing but great success with their lenses in terms of durability. They don't scratch very easily. And this 45 2.8 is no exception. It is also very durable. It's given me some great durability throughout the couple years that I've owned it. While I do typically use this lens for environmental portraiture, and that is definitely where it shines, I'm still not afraid to use it in the studio. It gives me a little bit different perspective. It tends to give me those nice full body shots. And do keep in mind that 45, when you get a little closer to a subject, a human subject, it can distort the face a little bit. And this shot you see right here, I did it intentionally, but definitely something you want to keep in mind if you use this for portraiture. The price on it, I would say for the GFX system, isn't too expensive. I would kind of put that in the middle. I mean, chances are you spent $6,000 or $7,500 on your camera if you're in the 100 megapixel variety. A little less, obviously, if you shoot on the 50 megapixel versions. But in relation to some of the other GFX lenses, I would actually put the price of this lens probably in the category of pros. It's definitely not a con, because this system in general is very expensive. And if you've already taken the leap to get into the expensive camera bodies, I think that most of the lenses are relatively inexpensive. It has a pretty common filter thread size of 62 millimeters. I'm going to go ahead and put that under the pros. Let's talk about the cons. There's not really that many, because as I said, it's my favorite lens. I would say that the autofocus sometimes misses, but that's more of an indictment of the Fuji GFX system, which if you're trying to get into this camera system for autofocus, you definitely want to look into the newer bodies. I have the GFX 100S. You can check out my review below. And of course, my biggest gripe about this camera is that the autofocus freaking sucks. But 35 isn't as problematic, I found, as say maybe the autofocus on some of their other lenses. In general, it's pretty okay for medium format. It's just that in general, medium format autofocus kind of sucks. Perhaps the biggest con and biggest disappointment of this lens is the 17.7 inch or 45 centimeter minimum focusing distance. When I shoot street, I like to walk up to things and get really cool tight shots where things throw out of focus in the background. Unfortunately, at 17.7 inches, you're rather limited there, and I would say that's probably the biggest con of this lens. Honestly, I tend to have a lot of cons for lenses, but I really don't have a lot of cons for this lens. That's probably why I keep saying it's my favorite Fuji GFX lens. That does it for today's episode. I want to thank each and every one of you for watching today. If you like what you saw, Tell me about it in the comments below. Do you own the GF45 2.8? Tell me about that in the comments below. Do you like it? Did you trade it in for the 55 1.7? I know some of you did. Tell me about that in the comments below. And if you like this channel, I humbly ask you to click the subscribe button below. And if, of course, you liked my Capture One Styles packs, I highly encourage you to go check those out on my website. I'm doing a really cool bundle on all three of them for a fairly cheap price. And if you're a fan of this channel and you want to hear my more uncensored photography and videography related opinions, go check out my other YouTube channel, the F11 Photography Podcast. And if you just want to listen to the audio only versions, you can find those on both Apple and Spotify and all other major podcast platforms. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.